and I realised my dad had sold.
Your father wanted to. Wow, Nina.
He sold her to traffickers where they harvest the organs.
The Drazzy Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Drazzy Show. Hope you're having a lovely day. And today I have an amazing guest with me, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. How are you, guest? How are you doing today?
I'm amazing. I'm a survivor of an honour-based killing, and that led me into the life of being an activist. So I'm known as Nina Aouilk, London's life coach. I also coach UFC fighters and MMA fighters with their mindsets.
That's quite interesting. You said you're a survivor of an honour-based killing.
Yeah, which is another word for attempted murder, really.
Who tried to murder you?
And my parents, my brother and my father, whilst my mother and sister-in-law were present.
So your mother and your sister-in-law stood by while your brother and your father tried to kill you?
That's right, yeah.
Why did they want to kill you, and how did you survive the killing?
Well, I come from a culture. My parents are from the north of India, the Punjab. So I'm a British-born Indian. So my heritage is Indian. And in cultures such as my own, but similar cultures in Africa, lots of Asia and the Middle East, if you bring shame upon your family, then they will try to kill you. And it could be anything similar to, what we've seen in the news not long ago, where your hair's showing where it shouldn't be, or you're wearing something inappropriate that people don't necessarily agree with. They will kill you. But in my circumstance, I'd left a forced arranged marriage, and I'd come home because I just wanted my parents to look after me. But I got the opposite, I guess.
Wow. So what? Just for the simple fact that you left a forced arranged marriage, you brought shame onto your family?
Yeah, because you're supposed to stay in an arranged marriage because of what people will say if you leave it. So for that reason, I was supposed to stay there regardless. There are certain unspoken words that parents bestow upon children from my culture. They don't have to say anything. They just have to look at you and you know exactly what they mean. I'm sure it's similar in the African culture too. But you know not to go against those rules and regulations. It's almost like a code book that you just don't step outside of those lines. So because I'd come home, because I couldn't take what was going on in my sham wedding as it was, my parents knew that I was on my way. They knew that people would speak about them. They knew that I wasn't supposed to leave this marriage. I was supposed to stay in there. But I was scared, and I wanted some love and comfort from my family, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people because they were never that anyway. But where do you go when you've got nobody else?
That is very true. I'm so sorry to hear that. So how did you survive it? Did you run? Did police come to help you? Did a neighbor come to help you? What happened?
No, it was quite a vicious attack. I'd been beaten all the time as a child, so I didn't think too much about getting beaten up, which is a really sad thing to say. But there are lots of women that are writing into me now saying the same thing. They didn't really think too much if they got slapped in the face or punched or hit with a rolling pin even by their mothers. It was all standard growing up in an Asian family like my own. But this beating was very different. I knew instinctively that there was going to be something very different when I walked in that day. And their intention was purely to kill. Their intention was to silence me. And with the beating, they also threw on a whole load of heavy insults, which really stays with a person. But they'd broken my jaw and my arm was broken. And then when I collapsed, they stamped upon me and kicked me. And my father had his foot on my throat, which at that point I felt I literally left my body. Because the beating, literally, I was off the walls. They were throwing me around because I was quite a little 21-year-old, very frail, had eating disorder. And they were a 6-foot tall brother. My father was an ex-professional wrestler. And I say that to give people a description of what these people were like. And they weren't punching. They were actually physically putting every part of their weight into this punch to hurt and damage and to destroy because they were so full of rage. And they left me there in the end because my other brother came in and said, don't kill her here. We'll take her to India and finish her off there, which is a very common thing. And I escaped by literally crawling out of the house. My mindset became so much so that I wanted to live. And I spoke to myself, I spoke out to myself that, come on, you've got this. I got to the door and then it was, come on, you can do this. And, you have to put yourself in my position. I was in a house full of angry people that didn't want me to be okay. I smelt because I'd soiled myself, having lain in my own blood for days, and the blood was dry. So I literally looked like something out of a horror film. My hair was matted, and I didn't know whether I was going to do it, but I was not wanting to give up either.
Wow, Nina, I don't even know what to say. There's some of the things you said. There's like I feel shivers down my back, my arms. Oh, man, and some of the questions I was going to ask you answered. Like, you told me how old you were. You were 21 at the time. I was going to ask you, did it happen here? Did it happen in India? You told me it happened here, and they were going to finish you off in India. So how would they have got you on that plane without police being aware? If this is a common thing, don't the girls normally get attention at the airports? Like, hey, they're going to kill me. They're taking me back home to kill me. Are they that fearful they don't do these things?
Yeah, basically the answer is yes. I was brought up with an imaginary best friend, like a lot of us, have this imagination as children, but my imaginary best friend was called fear. And everywhere I went, that friend was there reminding me, you can't do this, you're not allowed. And I did get a warning, which is why I crawled away. My mum's friend had popped her head through the door and said, if you don't go, they're going to kill you. They're sending you to India, which I knew was the plan already. I just didn't know what day it was, and I didn't know how long I had left before it was going to happen. But the thing is that if I'd got to the airport, would I have had the strength to say, help me? No. If my father was stood next to me on one side and my mother or my brother next to me, would I have asked for help? No, I would have asked without speaking, but would I have had the courage to actually vocally say, help me? No, because if you don't get the help, then you're in more of a worse situation than you were before. And I think when you're fearful of something, you have a very distorted sense of reality anyway. The fact I could have gone somewhere else that day, having left work, not wanting to go back to my forced marriage, not wanting to go back to the abuse I was suffering there. I could have gone to somebody else or the police or somebody, but I'll say this very clearly, the police do not help. And I don't care how many people out there have said they've helped me. I know that equally more people that they haven't helped. Even now with my charity, I'm getting people saying, I did this and I took the proof to them. And, the woman said she was going to kill me. And, this happens to men too, you have to understand. And the police have laughed it off like it's nothing. I've stood in Scotland Yard and told them all that, where were you? Where were you when I was the person that needed you? Because I stood in a police station when I escaped, not by choice, but because the taxi driver took me there. And they took photos. And I remember the policeman's name, but he didn't do anything. As soon as I mentioned honour killing, he said, let's get you to a hospital.
Wow.
So it's a case of culturally, they don't know necessarily how to deal with it. But they're pretty useless, and I don't mind saying that. They are pretty useless, which they know. I'm known by quite a lot of the Met Police and everyone now, but I'm going to say it as it is. Why am I going to pretend? Because we have this stigma of saying anything bad to anybody of authority, but then they're there to protect, aren't they? But where were they to protect me? And if not me, where were they to protect my sister?
Yeah. So okay, so you've made it clear. You went to the police station. What did they do for you? Did they put you in some kind of like housing? How did you separate your life from your family from that day onwards?
Yeah, so I'd actually escaped. I managed to get to a taxi rank, and the taxi driver took me to a friend of mine who said I could stay with them.
Okay.
They were a couple at the time. He was Nigerian, she was Indian.
Okay.
But they weren't there, or I think it was just too early for them to open the door. They probably didn't even hear me knocking.
Sorry to cut you. You said she was Indian, he was Nigerian.
Yeah, and they're the ones that had convinced me to leave my forced marriage and go back to my parents, saying that, you know what, things have changed. It's 4 years on. You don't need to suffer. Just leave that place and go back to your mum and dad. And I believed, that she's Indian, so she knows what she's talking about. And the African culture is similar to ours. He seemed to be very convinced that my parents would take me back.
Man.
And I was grasping onto, any little bit of hope that somebody would offer me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I made that decision really based on the influence I had from them.
Okay. So I'm going to make you get back to when you went to their house and they housed you for a bit. But what I want to touch on is your Indian friend. Was she also going to get honor killed for being with a Nigerian? Because I know some cultures in India do not mess with black people.
Oh no, I'm going to say it as it is. If you date somebody in my culture who's not the same caste, and we're not supposed to have these caste systems,
Yeah.
which are class systems,
Yeah.
we're not supposed to have them. But one of the first questions I get asked is, "Oh, are you Punjabi? Oh, what's your caste?" And I say, "Well, I don't practice them because in our religion, actually, we're all one. You are me, I am you. We're all one. It's all about love and no discrimination." But in the culture, which is what I keep trying to get across to people, there's a whole different set of rule books. If you want to marry somebody who's having a love marriage is a taboo anyway, but if you
Yeah.
want to marry somebody who's not in the same caste as you, there's an issue because they might not be as good as what your parents think they should be.
Yeah.
Then you get if you're allowed to marry somebody of white Caucasian skin, because weirdly in our culture, the lighter you are, the more beautiful you are, the more accepted you are. And the white man must be right, so to speak, no offense to anybody listening, but they are more accepted, especially if they have a good job. And then you get the other bottom sections, which are black and Muslim. And the Muslim goes back to a huge historic thing that happened between the Mughals and the Hindus, where we were fighting, but we're not there right now. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but this is now a totally different age and a new time. So why people hold on to that discrimination and that hatred is beyond me, because to me, whoever you are, I'm going to accept you for you. I'm going to love you, and I'm not going to discriminate. If you do something that's not nice or is hurtful to me, then I will take my opinion from that. But I won't discriminate just because of your religion or your colour. And then you get the black, which, if you go with somebody who's black, they're going to sell you, they're going to distribute you around your friends, they're going to prostitute you, they are the lowest of low, they don't work, they don't have any ideas of etiquette or grace, and that's how they're perceived. So for an Asian girl or an Indian girl, bringing it back to myself, somebody who's Punjabi, to be with someone who's black, there's a great stigma, a great shame. You will be blacklisted from the whole community, you'll be ridiculed, and your children will be picked on if you live within that community. So there's a huge stigma, huge thing.
Sounds like your friend's a very brave woman. So yeah, like I said, I'm not going to make you forget where you were going. So you went to go and stay with your friend, a Nigerian man, and his Asian wife.
No, I went to stay with them. And her parents didn't know about him at the time, so they were dating in secret. So that's kind of answers your question too.
Yes.
But I didn't know about the fact that I didn't really know too much about their relationship. I just knew they were my friends as far as I was concerned. And they didn't answer, so I ended up at the police station. Like I said, he started a report, but I don't know if he finished it. But I had to go to hospital because I had intensive injuries, very, very serious injuries, whereby they had to realign my hip. Because with the stamping, they had actually damaged my hip. So I was there for 2 months nearly in the hospital, but there was a yellow sticker, like a post-it note on my file saying honour killing. So if anybody came, they would kind of look at it and look at me in a bit of a shameful way, almost like a pity way, and just walk away without saying, "Hey, are you okay? No one's come to visit you. Do you want me to sit with you for a while, or can I get you something?" But I was used to being ignored. I was used to not being seen, as I call it. I was very used to that. So I just entertained myself by learning how other people do things, and how when somebody visits somebody in hospital, they bring grapes and Lucozade and presents and flowers, and I kind of used to watch, and I used to wait for the other parents to come or the people to come and visit, because I got joy out of seeing other people happy.
So where did your life go from there? Did they give you housing? How did you become? Because I'm looking at you now, and you look like a pretty amazing individual, personality-wise, image-wise. How did you get to this point? Who did you stay with? How did you get the confidence to like even tell your story?
That didn't come until literally 3 years ago, I'll be honest with you. But my story went on from there to a refuge, like a shelter for women. But you see, when you're brought up in the culture I am, you don't see women smoking, you don't see women drinking alcohol or taking drugs. It's a real bad thing if somebody does that. You're sort of stigmatized that they're very bad people. And to be honest with you, I was scared. I was scared of being in this refuge where they were fighting. They were dancing with their own demons, as I describe it. So
Wow.
I was feeling very vulnerable. And I asked the lady that was looking after the whole the housing part at the reception. I asked if I could get any money for bus fare to go to my friends, because they weren't that far away. They were about 8-9 miles away from the hospital and the refuge. So when I got to my friends, I knocked on the door, and my friend answered, who was Nigerian, and he said, "Oh, what happened to you?" Because he seemed genuinely shocked and concerned. I had obviously been cleaned up. I had
But you
started
still
my
had the
recovery,
bruises and
but
stuff.
yeah, there were still marks and bruises, and my arm was still in a sling. And I said, "Well, my parents tried to kill me in an honour killing." And he said, "Oh, well, Bally's gone. Her parents told her she had to come back and have an arranged marriage, and now she's in India getting married." And I said, "Oh," and I felt quite selfishly disheartened for myself, because I was relying on her to understand and give me that comfort almost as a person from my own culture. But he said, "You know what, you can stay here, but you have to pay me rent." He had a 2-bedroom flat, and I thought, well, someone's offering me a place to stay, and I think if anybody had offered me a safe place, I would have taken it. It wouldn't have mattered whether they were pink, blue, with polka dots. It wouldn't have made a difference. I would have stayed with whoever was giving me that ounce of compassion, I want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, how was the guy expecting you to pay rent? I mean, look at your situation.
Yeah, he was. He let me off for a little while, but I did get a job very quickly in the local council. I've always been very able
Yeah.
and confident when it comes to work. I've had to. I was like the first person of color who was a manager in the large corporation I worked in,
Okay.
going back to 1990s. And that was because I was fulfilling a need. I needed to earn a lot of money to make my father-in-law and mother-in-law happy where I was married into. So I wasn't really doing it for me ever. I was doing it because it was a survival thing.
Yeah.
But I turned my outer self into a different character almost. I would walk into the offices where I worked, and I would open the door and say, "Hi, everyone." Whereas 2 minutes before, I was climbing the stairs, crying and wiping tears off silently so that no one would see them. And,
Wow.
really sort of struggling with my life as it was. But they never saw that. They only saw this happy person. And I saw the reaction as well. When you're a happy person, people warm towards you. And I wanted that. I wanted that love from people, I guess, that energy from them. So I was more of this other Nina than most people knew. But when I was in a house, when I was with my friend, I was the same old scared, fearful. Are they going to find me? Are you going to be nice to me? Are you going to throw me out sort of person? That panicky kind of anxious person as I was as a child. So there were two sides to me. So I got a job really quickly working in the council. It was a really easy job. And I ended up staying with that person for 23 years because he raped me and got me pregnant. And I didn't know he did it because he'd got me drunk at a party, and I didn't know I was drinking alcohol. I used to joke about it and call my daughter a Malibu baby because I thought it was a bit of a joke, until I actually realised the seriousness of what had happened later on. But when you're in a situation, as I said, you don't necessarily see the truth of what you're going through. You're just going through it. You're putting one foot in front of the other. And suddenly I had this little baby girl. And I know you've got a daughter as well. So she was everything to me. I wanted to give her everything I never had. And it was very symbolic because in my culture, they don't celebrate baby girls. They hand out sweets, and there's a party normally when the boy is born. And it's a similar thing in African culture, I know. But when a girl is born, they tend not to do anything. If anything, people say, "I'm sorry that you've had a girl." So I was really happy. I celebrated her, and I promised her that she would have everything I didn't have, because my mum had literally taught me what not to do, as had my father. And that led on to me believing that when you have a baby with someone, you have to stay there. because again, our culture teaches us you can't have children with everyone. You don't go around having children left, right, and
Yeah.
centre. You stay with the person. You make a home. You make it work. It has to work, and you do whatever it takes. But to be fair, he was never really interested in me. I was there just for being there. So his anger, I think he took out on me because he was frustrated. And I think a lot of domestic violence is born from frustration.
And that's the guy who was with your friend who got sent
He
back.
was with my friend. I mean, obviously they'd split up because she'd left. And, I don't know what would have happened or what wouldn't have happened, but I do believe things happen for a reason too. I know that I was supposed to have my daughter and my children that followed. I know I was supposed to endure that domestic violence. It was a very extreme violence that slowly built up, and people think, why don't you walk away? But it builds up. It's a slow process. It's like we first got to know each other. We didn't date. So it was almost like you're straight in and you're pregnant and, you have this child and he's doing his own thing going out. I'm staying in, but that's what I'm used to as well,
Yeah.
from what I've seen. He was having extra relationships, from exterior, but I just thought that's what men do because my father did that and I didn't know any better. And then the businesses started because I'm very business orientated, goal orientated. I always have been. I used to know that if I cooked my mother's and father's food in a certain way, I would probably get to go upstairs quicker than if I didn't, because they would send me back to the kitchen and make me do it again. So I knew that if I do things in a certain way, I always want them to be not good. I want them to be excellent, excel in that way. Then I knew that I would do well at life. And as I said, I promised my daughter everything. So I needed to create that reality for her. He didn't work. I was the only one who worked. I created my own business from a bedroom, which then led to me developing quite a nice portfolio in the very affluent town that we lived. And I tried to get him involved, but he wasn't really engaging. He would be there for the show of it, but he wasn't really ever helping me maximize the benefits of running a business. And at one point I was running 8 businesses until I sold one, and then there were 7. And that was to fund my children's education, his spending habits, because as you know, people from Africa and India, they send money home. And I was sending his mother money every month. I was sending a quite substantial amount to support her, but I was also giving him a huge amount of money that it's embarrassing sometimes to say, just to be there. He needed his expenses, so to speak. And I literally was working to pay the bills, and everyone else was living a good life apart from me. But I never really saw it that way because I thought I was supposed to be that provider.
So what happened with you and that gentleman? You guys, obviously, you're definitely not with him. What happened? Did you find the same courage you found with your parents? Do the same thing?
Sadly, no, I didn't actually find the courage. And I failed as a parent to a certain degree too, not protecting my own children, which I, hand on heart, will say. You see, when someone's violent towards you, you don't think they're going to hit anyone else. You think it's just you. I used to be in the kitchen with the door closed whilst he was shouting at me and abusing me. And I would come out and smile and say to the boys, everything's fine. You know what he's like, it's okay. Because we make excuses for people's bad behaviour when you're a victim of domestic violence. And I never thought I deserved anything. He told me I was fat and ugly, and I believed him. I believed everything he told me, that nobody out there would ever want me, and if I left with the children, he would kill all of us. I believed him. He'd set my pillow on fire as I slept. My daughter had put it out once, and the second time my hair was on fire and I smelt it. And when I asked him about it, he said he wanted to end it all. And it wasn't until the last 3 years that I realised he wasn't trying to end it all, he was trying to end me. But when you're in that situation, you think, I don't want to aggravate him, I don't want to make him angry. But to cut a long story short, I had my daughter, then I had my other son, who was more accepted by his father, understandably. He seemed to be happier. We started to live very different lives. He was very sociable, I would say, with the local community, whereas I was encouraged not to have friends, not to go out. And I, to be honest with you, was loving being a mum. I was enjoying that so much and working. So there wasn't many hours for me to do anything other than that anyway. But I got pregnant again on my third pregnancy. He was starting to become very, very violent. And at this point, he pushed me down the stairs, and I ended up giving birth to a beautiful boy who died shortly after he was born. His name was Tyler.
So sorry to hear that.
And that should have been a wake-up call, but that was more of a, what am I living for? You know, and I didn't even want to be looking after the other two, if I'm being honest, because I was numb. It's the only way I can describe it. It's not something I'd wish on anybody, because the problem when you lose a child is that no one sees it. They just see you pregnant. You're the one carrying it. No one sees what goes on behind closed doors and the emotional and physical abuse that's happening. So you're really struggling. And when you lose that baby, people just say, oh, she lost a baby, but they don't understand that baby was a real person. That baby had toes and fingers.
Nina, do you want to terminate the interview, Nina?
No. It's okay.
Take your time.
I went on to trying to replace what I lost, you know, and I begged my partner that I wanted another baby, and I did have a baby boy, who's my life. He really is. And the abuse was just getting worse because the demands for money were getting worse. And it got to a point where my daughter went to university. She was studying biomedical science. She started to discover that life's not supposed to be as it is at home, because she's exposed suddenly to being out of a small town and seeing other people and how they live, and talking to other people from different cultures, and thinking, hold on, the way my dad treats my mum isn't okay, you know, and the way he treats me isn't okay. And when she started to question him, he cut off all ties, so I wasn't allowed to speak to her. He would speak to her, but I wasn't allowed. So I was allowed to send her money to support her, but not have anything to do with her, which caused me a lot of distress as a mother, because you want to know if they're okay, what they're doing, you know. And I was very close to her. And then my middle son, you know, my middle child, my son, he stood up to his dad one day because his dad was being very abusive, and it was just before his exams, his GCSEs. And as we were sitting down after the altercation, his father just came down the stairs and literally punched him in the back of the head for no reason from behind. And it's the first time I stood up and actually defended anybody, you know. But when you're a mother, if someone says anything or does anything to your children, you have this thing inside that's very defensive. But again, my solution was a bit of a strange one. I thought I'd send him to boarding school to keep him safe, rather than addressing the real problem. Yeah. So I had this plan, you know, that I'll send him to boarding, open up a few businesses to pay for that. And then my youngest can go too, and then maybe I'll leave. Because a lot of women stay in a relationship and men stay in a relationship because of the children. But they fail to see that the children are suffering themselves too. Domestic violence affects children as much as it does the person being beaten or shouted at.
Definitely. So,
and when it was just the two of us left, me and my youngest son, my daughter received a picture message from her father saying, I'm sorry. And it was a picture of me asleep on the sofa. She knew that I was not asleep because I suffered from insomnia, from the pillows being set alight. And also because he would lock us in our rooms at 11 o'clock at night and reopen the doors in the morning at 5 o'clock. So she knew I wasn't asleep. But what scared her was her brother's picture, because he was slumped like forward on a table. And she tried to ring us. She tried to call us, and I wasn't answering. Eventually I did answer the phone, and my throat, like it is now, I think the body holds on to trauma, I really do. But my throat was so dry that I went to the kitchen. And when I went there, I saw that he turned all the taps on and the house was full of gas. And people say, can you die from that? And yes, you can. And if something triggers that off, there's an explosion
Yeah.
literally waiting to happen. So he knew what he was doing. He kind of confessed it to her by saying sorry. But I didn't leave. And whoever's listening is probably thinking, what's wrong with her? I was so scared. I just did not know what to do. I literally lifted my son up and took him upstairs, opened windows, opened doors. And I remember sitting there thinking, what shall I do? What shall I do? What shall I do? And next thing I know, I hear the lock again. And I'm locked in the room with him. And the next time my son went to school, because he'd actually been off school, he'd just come out of hospital because he had a condition from stress, which is why I say to parents, please think about your children. When they're in these toxic environments, it affects them mentally and physically. When he went back to school, he broke down and he was very brave to say, this is what's happening to us. And we were removed very quickly without anything. You got 20 minutes to leave and you think, what do I take? Do I take photos? Do I take my clothes? And you actually stand there for 15 of those 20 minutes not knowing what to do. It's a real surreal position to be in, whereby you're leaving everything that was my home, as far as I thought it was my home. Everything my children had done, their little books, those pictures I used to bring back, the magnets on the kitchen fridge with their pictures, or their table tennis, certificates. That was all I ever knew, and I didn't really want to walk away, but I knew I had to. And it's the fear of the unknown as well. Will I be okay, and will I be able to support him? And it's a fear with reason, to be honest with you. There's a valid reason to be thinking those things. I wasn't allowed to take money with me. I had no cash to take. I wasn't allowed to take cards. I'd become a very high-risk case with the police. So with that, it means that you stay in a property that they give you for a little while, where they circle that area so that if anyone finds you, they'll know and they can help you. But this place was in the middle of a huge estate. I'd never seen anything like this myself, because I suppose I lived a different lifestyle that I'd created. My father had created a good lifestyle working the way he did. So I was immediately intimidated by the boys on the bikes throwing bottles. I didn't know what to say to my son. I had a long coat on. He had just his shorts, trainers, and his phone, and I think he had a hat. That was it. And I don't know what I expected, but I expected something like Tracy Beaker, where you go into a house and there's a bedroom with a bed, and you get a cup of tea given to you and someone talks to you. I think I really expected that, but I was shown the way and they left. And as soon as I stepped into the property, the carpets made this squelchy noise because they were full of urine. And the walls literally had human feces smeared on the walls, because I think there must have been a baby trying to empty their own nappy out because of the level where the smears were. But it smelt really bad. There was no gas or electric or water because everything ran on a meter. I didn't know how meters worked.
So you're trying to tell me no one even prepared the place for your arrival? No one even tried to...
There was no bedding. There was nothing, no food. It was just an empty shell. And I remember, when you need a tissue and you can never find one, and you find that little scraggly bit. I remember digging deep into my pocket and I found this little bit of tissue, and I started to clean the bed. One of the bedrooms was beyond usable. We couldn't use that. But there was one that looked a bit cleaner. So it was a double bed, and I cleaned the bed and wrapped my son up in my coat and lay him down because he was mentally and physically exhausted. And I sat in the other room on the floor on a really harsh blue kind of industrial carpet and cried. For the first time in my life, actually just allowed myself to cry, because I was always told as a child that you're always crying, you're always lying, you're always, always something negative. And I then didn't want to cry because I didn't want my parents to think I was weak because I was a girl. I never cried in front of my partner because it used to agitate him and irritate him, and he'd say things like, you're always crying. So I used to say to myself, don't cry, because he doesn't want to see you crying. I didn't want to show my children I was crying because I wanted them to see this happy, smiley face all the time. So when I eventually left this world, they would remember that, not knowing. It was almost like I'd stitched my eyes up, and that water was just building up and building up, and that emotion was just waiting to have these stitches cut so they would overflow and be
Yeah,
set free.
yeah.
And that's how it was. It literally was that way. I cried so much I describe it because I remember the moment so clearly, that I was cold. I was cold, I was hungry, I was scared, and I was sobbing. You know, one of those cries where your body shakes because you just can't take it anymore. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I looked down and I'd created this like puddle almost. And I said, what are you going to do? Because I've always spoken to myself, always.
I guess you'd
I
have
suppose
to, with everything you've been through, who do you turn to? You'd have to find solace and strength in yourself.
I think I never, yeah, because I never had anyone. I just almost spoke to myself from the outside like a third person. And I said, what are you going to do, Nina? Are you going to dance in these tears, or are you going to drown in them? And for some reason, I saw my son's face in my head, you know, that you've got him, you've got to look after him, you've got your other two children. I stood up
So,
and I started dancing about to no music.
sorry
And
to cut you,
weirdly,
Nina.
I was crying and I felt super free.
Nina, sorry to cut
Just
you. You just said your son a few times when you left. Where were your other children when you left?
my one was at boarding school.
Okay.
So he was looked after, you know, and I thought, oh, he's in like a luxury place. I've paid up front.
Okay.
But really, he had this abandonment issue, that, and a guilt thing, that they're homeless almost, and I'm here. And we did become homeless. And when we did, it was very hard for him because he knew he was living in accommodation. My daughter was at a university accommodation. She said to come and stay with her, but that's the first place her father would look. So I also had to be considerate to trying to stay safe. You know, I was trying my best. And as parents, we don't get a rule book or a guideline of how to do things. You kind of make mistakes, you figure it out as you go along. But I've made a lot myself, and I'm using those mistakes to say to other parents, don't do this. Listen to your children. All they want is to be heard. Don't stay in a relationship because you think you're doing it for the kids, because they're suffering. They might not be saying anything, but those scars are going to be deep rooted, and they're going to take them forward, either with their new relationships, or at some point in their life they're going to be triggered, and you know, their mental health is going to really suffer. So don't stay for them.
You know, when you were saying how, you know, you were told not to cry, and every time you cried, your partner would just be irritated. It made me wonder, people who are abusive, maybe the tears remind them of who they are, and they hate what they are. And they,
I don't, yeah.
sorry, go on.
I was about to say, I don't think we'll ever know what people think because we're not them. You know, we could both like coffee, the same type of coffee, but I will probably get a different kind of feeling drinking the coffee to what you do.
Yeah.
We just, people say to me, why don't you want to know? And I don't want to know because there is no closure, in the sense people think they have this closure, but people only do what they know. And this is so misinterpreted by people when I say this, that she's condoning the behavior, she's not holding them accountable. But I'm being realistic that I can't build a house because I just don't have the knowledge. I don't know where to start, but somebody else could, who has the knowledge. So my parents did what they thought was right in their minds. It wasn't right at all. It was wrong. I was neglected as a child. I was abused sexually. I was just not looked after as a child.
Sorry. Sorry. So they didn't just try and honor kill you because you left your marriage. Who was sexually abusing you?
No, what happened was the marriage came about because when I was 14, my father and his friends raped me. My job was to literally do all of the food in the house, which is quite standard, and I'm sure you know this yourself. Girls tend to do all the cooking, and I was literally a modern day slave in my room, allowed out only to cook or to go to school or to do the washing. I wasn't in any conversation or engaging in any any normal family activity with my family, I was separated like a servant, basically, from the age of 6, and that's all I knew. But when I used to get woken up at night, it was because my father would return from the pub with his friends, and I was cooking from them from the age of a very young age, probably 9 or probably younger, where they would arrive and I would cook them the same things, rice and chicken and some chapatis, and then I would have to wait to clear up. That was my thing, because my dad didn't like mess. So they would eat and drink, and I would sit as a young child waiting on the bottom step of our stairs to clean up. And that's when I would go in and pick the dishes up. But when I was 14, I think men have this, I know it sounds very primitive, but I think they sense when a girl is coming into her womanhood. And I think there's something within their DNA or their mindsets, I'm not sure, because I can't explain it. But sorry, it's quite difficult to talk about. But my father was the first person that literally held me down, and I kept my eyes closed. And it was a very vicious attack, almost frenzied, of people raping me, abusing me, punching me, biting me, until I was literally just passed out. And that was another point of my time that I feel I may have died for a little while and come back, but it kind of broke me, if I'm being honest.
I'll be honest with you, Nina, like the strength that you have, like I really admire you, because when you first said, they wanted to honor kill you because you had left an arranged marriage, I thought that's the worst they could have done. I like, this is just, I mean, what kind of father does that? And then his friends as well? His friends don't respect him. He doesn't respect he's manning around his friends. He allows this, his 14-year-old daughter.
I don't think they saw me as their daughter. I think they saw me as somebody from the outside that was living there. I don't feel that I was ever part of that family. I tried my best. They didn't speak to me. It was all very non-verbal communication by a few words of cook, come. They would say my name and come. But there was I never felt part of anything really. And yeah, I just didn't feel it. But I did become pregnant from that rape. And when I found out, obviously I was beaten by my mother. She was really cross. And I thought, what have I done? Because I always blamed myself, because you do when you're from that kind of mindset. And sorry, I ended up having to go somewhere for an abortion with my parents. I remember the drive there. I remember there's a lot of green countryside wherever I went. I remember they put me into a gown and I had gas and air, and then I passed out, so they must have put me under some general anaesthetic or something. But I remember when I came round, I was helped to sit on the grass, and there was a lot of us. There was like a line of women and me, a young girl. And I was in pain. I'll be honest with you, I was in a lot of pain. They told me that I had to stay there for a couple of hours and my parents would take me home. And I remember that a lady, this is the first time anyone had actually touched me in a motherly way or a parental kind of loving way. And so I say that people don't understand the power of kindness and love. They just don't understand it. But she stroked my hair, which was dirty, because I was always dirty, because my parents didn't really encourage me to wash. And she stroked my hair and she gave me a cup of tea, which sounds funny, but tea became my favourite drink because of her. And I remember looking half upwards, because I never used to make eye contact, because I wasn't allowed to. I remember looking halfway up and seeing some blonde hair hanging down and thinking, God, I can't be this bad if she's actually touched me and she's brought me a cup of tea, and that's what I remember from that whole experience, this act of
Oh,
kindness that went so far with me, and the
you think?
fact that there was a conversation going on in my head that, are you that bad? Are you bewitched? Because they used to say I was possessed by, some bad spirit, that I'd brought bad omen on the family. I was bad luck because I was born a girl. And I was questioning what they were saying and saying to myself, is that true? Could you be okay? Could you be not a bad person? Could you not be this evil person that they call you? Because they didn't call me by name, they called me witch. That was my
That
name that they
that is what
called
they
me.
called you if they wanted you, if they wanted to get your attention, they called you witch.
Yeah, it's called Boothany in our language, which means like a bad spirit, evil spirit, a witch. And that's all they called me, Boothany. So
Man.
I would answer to that because that's who I thought I was. And, if you keep telling your young daughter something over and over again, that she's 6 foot tall, she'll believe it.
Mm.
I was being told from a very young age that I was bad luck, good for nothing. Nobody wanted me, and that carried on through life. I heard the same sort of words from my ex-partner, so I believed it.
Where did you find the strength to be the person you are now? Because obviously some of the things you went through leaving your family home is due to the fact that you never had that family stability. You never had that concept of what a real family or a loving family is like. So there's certain things you tolerated. But how did you, because this is all psychological, how did you speak to
Yeah.
yourself? How did you find the Nina that I'm speaking to now that knows all these things were wrong and knows what is right and is a loving mother? How did you become this person that has children that love you? How? You could have been, you could have passed on, you could have, carried on the cycle.
Yeah, you do, don't you? You either do the same, like they say, hurt people, or you go the opposite way. And since a young age, I learnt this mechanism of letting go very easily. I didn't hold things in too much. Some words I couldn't let go of. The fact I was a girl, I couldn't let go of because I couldn't change that. And I wished so many times I was, at school, I used to look at people and think, I wish I was you. I wish I was a white, Caucasian, British boy as opposed to this Indian dirty girl that I am. I would just wish I was anybody but me. But often I just accepted things. And when you learn how to accept things, you let go of them very quickly. You just let them go. You don't sort of muster in that pain or hurt. I never really understood life until recently. And what caused that was I was forced to move 400 miles plus away from my home and where I was brought up and where my parents lived not too far, where my ex-partner lived, where my home was, where my businesses were. I was forced to move away because of my ex-partner, because he was still trying to kill me. My parents then got wind that I was now, with children and on the road, and they were trying to find me. Because again, people were going to talk about the fact she was with this guy, now she's left him, and he was a black guy, and now she's got these mixed children, and it was all very up in the air. There was something else that came into it too. When I became homeless in 2015, the police found me because somebody took me in. She was a Christian woman. I always talk about her because she deserves that recognition. Her name's Nikki Bliss. She's a very loving, gentle person who said, come and stay in my house. And I was a little bit stubborn and I said, take my son. I felt I didn't deserve that help. When you're always the one providing, doing for everybody else, it's very difficult to receive. And she talked me into it, and I said, all right, I'll have an agreement with you. 30 days I'll stay at your house, then I'll leave. And she allowed me to have a bit of space, but I was being looked for by my partner. She went to the police station with me to try to report things because he'd even followed us into a police station at one point, but nothing could be done because the police said, you have a non-molestation order, but he hasn't hit you. He's just spoken to you and he could say anything. It's your word against his. And it's just, you feel like you're fighting a losing battle all the time, trying to get help. But we ended up moving away because of this. And it's probably one of the best things I did. if I'm being honest, because there's a lot of fear involved in moving away. How will I adapt? It's not anything I know. I don't know anybody there, but then I didn't really have anyone anyway. But you get to start again. And you get to start again without the noise from your family and the past. And you get to start again without your ex-partner and the people that were in the community that knew you. And suddenly it's very quiet. That's the only way I can describe it. I started to go on this spiritual journey when I got to 50. And I was standing on the grass because I had a house with a big garden, because I love the country, because that's where I'm from. And I had a awakening, I guess, a realization that actually everyone that's ever said anything to me, from my teachers down to my parents to my ex-partner to, you know, even the people that tried to help me rehouse that weren't very nice to me, it was all an opinion of that they held, not my words. It was their narrative, and that I get to decide who I want to be. So I said to myself, again, talking to myself, saying, who do you want to be, Nina? And I remember being really still in the garden, like I said, barefoot on the grass, and listening to these parakeets I think we've got near us. And I said, well, I want to be tall and proud and beautiful. So I started there, and I started to say to myself, but I believed it. Saying something and believing it are two different things. You know, we could all stand here and say, I'm a money magnet, I am this, I am that. But if you don't actually believe it, there's pointless, you're wasting your breath. But I actually started to see myself as tall. I'm not that tall. But I started to see myself. I'm about 5'5". But I started to see myself as this very tall, elegant creature, and someone who was very beautiful, not from the outside. I was working from what was on the inside. I knew that I had never hurt anyone, that I had, you know, as a child, I'd read every religious textbook looking for answers. And I realized the answers were always there in me, that I had them all the time. I was the one wanting to feel like I belonged, but all I ever needed was to belong to me. That was where I needed to start. And it was like the penny dropped, and it was a very surreal, very beautiful, very enriching, loving moment of warmth with the sun on my face. And I started to really love who I was, and I started to love everything that nobody else loved about me. Everything that everyone had said they didn't like is what I actually loved more. You know, the fact I was raped, and there should be a shame and stigma about that, and that we don't talk about it because as a victim, you know, we're almost dirty to the world. Well, I took that dirt on, and I relished in that dirt like it was a beauty cream, and said, actually, my hands have never been dirty. It was the people that had abused me that were the ones that were dirty. So I'm not going to not talk about things that are hidden for a long time. And I'd hidden that from myself for a very long time, that it had even happened. It was almost like a trapped memory. And I faced the fact that I was protecting my ex-partner still by not admitting even to me what he'd done. You know, I was saying, well, you know, he was angry, he never really wanted to be with me. We kind of got together in a strange way, so maybe he was unhappy. And I stopped making excuses, and I said to myself that he was man enough to know he could have walked away at any time. He didn't need to hurt me or my children or try to take our lives. He was happy to take the money, and it all became about money. Greed is a horrible thing. It's a very disgusting, demonic thing that people become so consumed with that they forget sometimes how to be just human beings. And I saw myself as this almost like post box of love, you know, delivering letters to people. And I realized I had the ability to say to people, look, I see you. I hear exactly what you're saying. There is no ego here, so I don't need to talk about myself. Let me see what I can do for you. How can I help you? And it's within that sort of time my career started to grow as a mindset coach. Lockdown was the time where I would go onto an app called Clubhouse and listen to people that were really struggling with, you know, this new regime that was taking away our freedom. And they were struggling, but that had always been my life. You know, I was in that room as a child from 6. I wasn't allowed to go out. Was never allowed to have friends, even as an adult. And You know, my ex-partner had tracked my car to the point where if I went to a shop and my daughter would say, why do you always need to have the receipt? I would say, I have to show the timestamp on the receipt to your dad. But suddenly I didn't have that. So whilst everybody else was complaining about being locked down, I was just finding my freedom.
That is quite interesting. That is a very, very interesting point. The fact that everyone was feeling entrapped and you were feeling free.
And I don't tend to, once I found me, I decided who I would listen to and who I wouldn't. I wasn't fearful of authorities. Authorities I knew had let me down over and over and over again, to the point where a teacher should have picked something up when I turned up at school without a lunchbox, without having been washed, you know, with dirty hair, with dirty clothes. They should have seen the neglect. But again, a lot of people will turn a blind eye and expect the next person to deal with it. They should have picked up on the fact every break time or lunchtime I was beaten up because of the skin that I'm born into, because everybody else was racially aggressive towards me. And I would have my hair pulled and the whole ding dong and the jokes of my skin colour and the smell that I had. And I probably did smell, don't get me wrong. But still, as children, we're guided by adults, and within their care, I wasn't looked after. Right to the point of the people that carried out the procedures of my abortion, they would have known that something was seriously wrong and done nothing about it, because I don't remember seeing another child or a young person there. And the reason I started speaking out as an activist was partly because of me, but hugely because I found out I had a half sister. My father had an affair, and she was 6 years old. In 2015, the police came to find me, as I started to tell you. Then I got distracted. I thought my ex-partner had sent them to find me, but I was actually homeless, living in this lady's home. And they needed to tell me that they needed a character reference for my father. He was being investigated for abduction because he had taken by force his 6-year-old daughter, who he'd had out of marriage with a Polish lady, and he'd sold her or left her somewhere. And I didn't understand, you know, I was very disorientated to understand what I was listening to. The police said that he'd put her into school. None of it made any sense to me. And it took me a while to actually absorb the information. I started to ask questions. With Clubhouse, I was being led to people that dealt with human trafficking. I got my name as London's life coach by the people that were listening to me, because they said that I just made a lot of sense. I'm very much, I won't say very much, but when I do, I want it to be of value, to add something, whereas a lot of people like the sound of their own voices, and they will talk and talk and talk and talk, but they're not actually the person they pretend to be themselves, because they're wearing designer shoes and having Botox and saying they're healthy, whereas they are not, and they don't look healthy, and they're living a fake reality themselves, but they fool people into believing in them, and that gives them that boost of ego that they need. And there was a lot of people like that on Clubhouse, but I wasn't one of them. I was literally the one that would come in at the end and say, but how do you feel, and what can I do for you? Instead of saying, I suffered and I survived, so you can do it, because you can't tell somebody what they can and can't do. But through that, I also met people that were survivors of human trafficking, and I met organisations that helped people that were trafficked, and I reached out to two of them, one based in Switzerland and the other one based in America. And one of them found out where my sister was left to be a place where, they harvest organs. And I realised my dad had sold.
Your father wanted to. Wow, Nina. Take your time, Nina. Whenever you want to terminate, Nina, let me know, because I know this is heavy.
He sold her to traffickers where they harvest the organs, and I felt guilty because I didn't hold him accountable for what he did to me when I was a child, when I was an adult. I didn't have the strength or courage to hold him accountable, and I felt he thought he was untouchable because he had a level of arrogance, and with that he took her. So I decided then I would do 100 messages to the world. I just found myself. My daughter was finishing her second degree. My other son was now in university studying, and my younger son was with me. My sons were struggling with mental health, so I started doing talks around London. I would travel to London, to wherever would listen to me, to talk about mental health in young black men, because that's what they are. And it's really difficult to ask for help. So I wanted people to hear it from a parental point of view, that I never once asked them, are you okay? I was just busy trying to sort their lives out, trying to pay bills, keep them in higher education in the best places they could study, in my opinion. But I never once said, what do you need from me as a mother, or have an honest conversation as a young adult with a mother to say, you know what, son, I'm struggling, so that they know emotions are normal, so they're not bottling them up the way I was. And I started to talk out about honour killings, gender-based violence, and how it is being born as a British Indian girl that nobody really wants, that nobody really saw. And knowing that there are other women living my life still, from different cultures and communities, with domestic violence, not wanting to step out because they're so scared that they're going to be killed, not understanding they're already in a very vulnerable and dangerous position. I wanted to speak out for those young children that are being abused or have been abused, that are too scared to say to a teacher, please help. Because if anybody had asked me after the rape, I would have broken down, because I was so desperate to just have someone look after me. I just needed somebody to literally put their arms around me like the lady had touched me, just to give me some human interaction, so that I would know that not everybody's like that. And I started to speak out because I just didn't want anyone to suffer the way I had. I wanted them to discover this freedom that's on the other side of fear, that love is actually so precious and such wealth, that with that you can do so much more than you can a business or a big house, the way I had a 7-bedroom house with cars and private schooling. And none of it meant anything in comparison to the love that I now have for myself, that I can pass on to you, to my children, to anyone struggling. You can't help somebody if you can't help yourself. You can't be that person. You can't lead if you don't know where you're going. You can't be a light, as they say, if you're in darkness yourself. So I started a charity, and just before you contacted me, as you know, I was trying to do these 100 messages, and I was very close to the end, and this is my 102nd now. But number 97, which holds a message in itself, that I wanted to give up when I was at 50, because I was tired of retelling my story, sharing these experiences, because you forgive, but you don't forget. The pain is always there, knowing that I have a sister somewhere maybe that could be alive or could not be, kills me. But I know there are other girls out there that are taken in such a way, whether they're forced into a marriage, or whether they're killed, or whatever the case may be. They are an extension of me, and I'm an extension of them. They are, we're one thing. And I just knew that I couldn't stop because of that. I'm quite stubborn. When I say I'm going to do something, as you know, I'll do it. But I was tired, and by 97 I was so tired. The video was recorded at 3 a.m. our time in London. It was an American company, and it took 3.5 hours to record this. 20-minute video, and I'm desperately wanting to say stop every 2 minutes, but I'm soldiering through. And I went away this February for my birthday, and they sent me a message to say it's being released, and I looked at it and thought, oh, I don't want to watch it. And then when I got back, all of a sudden I had a new following on my professional page, and I'd gone from 300 followers to, I think it was 21,000 supporters, I'm going to call them. People that needed help, people that recognised there was a problem. And now it's at 37,000, I think. But with that comes a lot of responsibility, because I ended up with 9,000 messages across my LinkedIn, across my emails from both my websites and my Instagram, my Facebook, Messenger. Everything's full of messages from victims, from survivors, from young girls as young as 9 who were in Ireland, who had been trafficked from Peru, asking for help, because suddenly everybody thought they heard someone that they trusted, because I was just being me. And you know, that video has been viewed 21 million times, and I realise it's 21 million lives I've reached, 21 million messages, 21 million maybe thoughts of hope or inspiration, or to say to them, you know, if you know someone, this is what you can do. If you see somebody who's at school that's coming to school dirty, maybe ask a question discreetly. If you have a family that lives behind you that's from India, or their ethnicity is Indian or Asian or African or Middle Eastern or even South American, and the girl disappears because she's gone to live with an auntie, which is what they say, question it. If you're a teacher at school, maybe pay a bit more attention, ask that child, because it's within their responsibilities. And us as humans on this earth, in this human experience that we're living, we should be asking one another, how are you? Simple. Not you all right, which also almost answers the question for them.
Yeah.
We should be extending love. We've been taught to cross the road if someone's coughing, because we've detached so much from society, we don't know how to communicate. All of the apps have stopped people really finding, in my opinion, true love, because they are so superficial now by a photo or by a comment, and things are just on a downhill spiral unless we start doing something about it. So I realised that video was the start of a movement of love, because I describe myself as love, because that's how I see myself. If you see yourself as light, you will describe yourself. No one can question that. And with the fact that I see myself as love, my intention is to love others, but to also get them to love this, you know, this whole universe that we live within, not to keep that love for themselves. It's not for us, it's to give. We should be of service to others. It should be the way life just genuinely is. All these religious texts teach us how to live and how to, you know, be religious, but in a way they're just teaching us how the way of life should be. It's not really a religion. It's just telling you to be a good person, to love one another, to extend kindness. And it doesn't cost a thing. That in itself is true wealth.
Yeah. There's two things that were on my mind, and just before I even asked, I was going to say I agree with everything you've just said in regards to like them being like guidelines to how we should treat other human beings. I definitely agree with that. Your family, were they ever held accountable for what they did in terms of the physical abuse? And was your father imprisoned or held accountable for what he did as well? And also, your half sister, you never found her?
So my father came out of jail last year for abduction. The police charged him for abduction, but abduction's quite a short sentence, and without a body they can't charge him for murder. People are not stupid when they take young girls abroad to do whatever they're going to do, because they kind of disguise that criminal activity that they've taken part in. With regards to my sister, I'm still hopeful that one day she'll come back. My arms are always wide open, and I hope I'm wrong. I have no shame if she comes back and she's alive, because that matters more than me telling this story. I don't know, because I have no way of really finding her. I am trying, and I have had some people give me some hope that she may be alive, but then, it turns around. But I'm working with victims of trafficking. I know sometimes they turn up years after they've gone missing. I don't know whether she will, just because of where she was left. It's known to be India's one of their biggest income is selling organs, so it's known for that. It's a big business, as is trafficking, as you know.
It's a big business in all third world countries, because these are places where people can go missing with no identification or anything,
Yeah, well, she's a British-born citizen, which is the upsetting thing. The police went there and they weren't allowed access to where she was, and that didn't make them question why they can't have access. If, as an authority, it doesn't make any sense. But again, I feel let down by them. I always will do, and I'll continue saying that until I see change. I'm not even sure why they invite me back to talk. It's almost like I tick a box for them, that they've had a survivor tell her story, and accountability for them to be doing something, or to be seen to be doing something, but they're not really doing anything, which we know because of recent things that have come out of the police reports with the misogyny and the way they act with women and everything. But going back to my own experiences and trauma with my family, I forgave them a long time ago. I forgave my ex-partner. As I said, I didn't forget. I wasn't going to do anything at all. I just wasn't. But somebody contacted me from Venezuela saying that my partner was holding her almost as a hostage via FaceTime, and I didn't understand it, but she'd contacted my daughter, who put her in touch with me. And it's like we're now on this computer talking to one another. He was watching her every move. He'd stopped her talking to her daughters. He'd stopped her speaking to her mother. And she was abiding by it from so many miles away. And people would say, well, is she crazy? But you don't understand the power that a narcissistic person has upon someone, the control they have, and how you almost tell them what they want to hear because you just want them off your back. So if they keep hounding you and say you did it, you'll just say you did it, even though you didn't. So you'll abide with them and what they want, just to keep them off, just to stop them harassing you further. And she'd got herself in a real pickle, and somebody else he had who lived in West London had put a charge on that property at the time when it still belonged to both of us. And she'd put a charge, which, if somebody doesn't understand what that means, she had then an interest in the building that we owned, the house, because he had taken £30,000 from her. And this is somebody who's very greedy. Money was his main ulterior motive with me. He didn't work, which is a very common thing for domestic violence scenarios, where the partner doesn't work and just literally takes the money as a control thing from the one that is working. But yes, I wanted to charge both of them. I wanted to charge my father. I can't remember half of the people that were there, or even some of them. Only the one that I do remember is the wedding that I had was an arranged marriage, was arranged by one of the men that had raped me, one of the criminals, as I call them, not perpetrators, the rapists. He took me as a sex slave for 4 years, and I was married to his son in a sham wedding. So it was a pretense to the world.
Sorry, Nina, I'm a little confused. Your marriage, you talk about the marriage where you came back home at 21?
The arranged marriage, the forced marriage. Okay. I was a child, so I was traded. My father didn't know what to do with me after the abortion because I was no longer a virgin, and you have to be a virgin to get married.
So one of the men that helped your father...
So one of the men that raped me when my father raped me...
his son is who you married?
I married his son because his son had a white English girlfriend, and that wasn't allowed in the community, but it's very common. So they said that I'd get married, but I'd have a separate room, which I had downstairs. Again, I was treated as a servant, and my job was, again, to cook and clean. But the mistake they made was they let me go out and get a job. So I got a job. which meant I met my friends and I met other people.
Mm.
But I was literally raped every day by my father-in-law and
Mm.
very mentally abused by my mother-in-law. I was starved of food because she would throw my plate in the bin and tell me to eat out of the dustbin like a dog. And that's what she used to say. And I started to eat out of the dustbin, but I kind of gave up because I lost that desire to eat. I kind of lost hope. It was a very disruptive part of my life being in that family environment and being abused the way I was. It was almost worse than childhood because at childhood I was just neglected and beaten. But this was a different form of abuse, and I was fearful all the time that I would be gang raped again, that he would bring other people, but he didn't. He was just very sadistic with some of the things he did. He tied my ankles with a coat hanger, metal coat hanger, which made them bleed. And they would leave me naked, tied up with metal coat hangers for a whole day sometimes, and I would just sit in the same place. But I would have sat there regardless because I was so scared, and they didn't know that. Maybe they did. It was very much a control
Who is
thing
they?
for him.
Who is they? Is it him and his son?
No, his son didn't actually have much to do with me. It was him and his wife. The wife was very angry towards me, very aggressive, very, she would poke me with scissors. She was just very abusive physically and mentally.
What the? So, you're married to his son. Did his son not have any pride in you to say, look, leave my wife alone? Or was he just happy did he know his father was doing this to you?
We didn't have a relationship. His son had no relationship with me. He knew that it was so that the community would think he had an arranged marriage, which meant he could carry on with his relationship with the girl he was seeing who was white, Caucasian.
Oh my God. So that's the only reason why that man brought you into his home, because he wanted to continue doing what he was doing to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was 17. I was supposed to be in their house when I was 16, but they have to marry their daughters off beforehand. So I ended up going when I was 17, but I was still a very young girl, very naive. And, I had no self-worth, no self-love. I was just surviving, I guess.
I really admire you, I really admire your strength. I don't think I've met anyone, even in movies or books I've read, I don't think I've come across anything like this before. This is a true, you're a true survivor.
The saddest thing is that this is a story of a lot of the women that contact me now.
So I'm probably
not
ignorant.
necessarily in the same order, but they've had a huge element of my life, whether they were abused. And there's a huge, not just in Asian cultures, there's a huge portion of child abuse that takes place within families, because the people that carry out this abuse, the abusers, know that the children won't really say anything, or that the mothers, when they're told, won't do anything. A lot of the people that have reached out have said, well, I told my mum that my uncle was sexually abusing me and she told me to stay quiet. And it carries on for years, to the point where there was one lady who thought she was married to her father because he was forcing sex upon her from a very young age. She thought he was her partner because that's how he had groomed her to believe and be. It's just not spoken about. There's a stigma, there's a shame, as I said, attached to it. And I'm trying to tell the world that if we speak about it, we take away the power from those that actually carry out these hideous acts, the ones that think it's okay to do such a thing to a child. We take it away from them because they know the child will speak out. It's like in schools, they're teaching all of this gender fluidity rubbish, which I don't necessarily agree with.
I totally
Why are they
disagree with
not
it.
teaching, if somebody in your house is abusing you or talking down to you, let's report that. Let's have more emphasis on those sort of things that can enable someone not to suffer the way I did, or another person is suffering right now. So
this is the side of the world that the mainstream narrative that is sold, the people who, take in that narrative will never know exists. I mean, I myself, I consider myself a pretty, learned person. I like to know what's going on in the world, but even I don't think about this side of life. The people who, like yourself and those like you who are surviving these things, are going through these things, and we would never in a million years know that there are people out there doing this to people. We know it exists because we see it in movies, we read about it because one or two get caught in the papers and that, but we don't realize it could be happening right down the road, it could be happening next door. Like, man, this is...
It probably is happening next door and up the road. You see, everyone thought our family, when I'm talking about my former partner and my children's father, everyone thought our family was a perfect family from the outside, because my children were all very polite. They, looked after, which they were to a certain point. We would turn up sometimes as a family unit. Very rarely would we turn up as a family unit, but when we did, people thought their father was very kind and considerate, because the people that manipulate and control know how to also fool people. If I turned around and said, which I did a couple of times, I'm not allowed to come because it automatically comes to me to say those words. When people say, would you like to come to my birthday party, because our children are in the same school and everything, and I'll say, no, I'm not allowed. They never picked up, and if they did, they wouldn't say anything, because we're such a society that's been created of someone else's problem when we're not going to deal with it. If that lady hadn't taken me in, my life would have been totally different, but she showed kindness. She opened her doors to us. Makes a huge difference. But people have become very desensitized to anybody else's love or needs. And they'd rather like somebody on social media they don't even know, as opposed to like the person sat next to them.
Yeah. Yeah, we do live in a very, very strange world. Nina, I mean, I'll be honest with you, at this point, I don't even know what to say, seriously. At this point, all I can do is just admire your strength, seriously.
I suppose I come across as very confident because I'm sure of who I am, because I've rewritten and unlearned everything I was taught to relearn who I actually am. I know that we're all on this earth for a reason. I believe in that and believe in our purposes. I know also that the world is very fake and filtered, and I refuse to be part of that. I will stand in my truth. I have a lot of hate. I have a lot of trolling. I have a lot of death threats that are serious death threats coming through. But I also know that I'm protected because I'm here for a reason. So my voice won't be silenced, as I've literally only just found it.
Are those death threats coming from your community?
From the Middle Eastern community, from LinkedIn actually did actually act on it, which I have to commend them for. The highest form of taking away shame is to behead somebody, and that is the threat that I'm receiving, that I will be beheaded. And if I believe it will happen, it may happen, but I believe it will not happen, that I have many years to still be on this earth and bring this message forward to create ripples of change, maybe not in my lifetime, but in lifetimes to come, that there will be more compassion towards the child that's born, whether it's born a girl or a boy.
Yeah. So you said now, you've got the organization. Is that to help people who've been through what you've been through? And if so, how can they find you, if they need, your help?
So I'm known as London's Life Coach on Instagram. I do have a YouTube channel too, which I haven't put a lot on, but there is a few things on there. I think if you just Google my name, it comes up.
London Life Coach.
Just Nina Aouilk comes up quite easily now. I think after 100 podcasts, I seem to have broken the algorithms.
Yeah, it's the first time I think I just don't even know how to compose myself or articulate what I'm feeling, because thank you, Nina. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Drazzy Show.